Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about ecological tolerance, and this is discussed within Module 17 of the textbook. I want to start by having you think about what does an organism actually need to live? So what does any living thing actually need to survive? I put the little picture here from the classic animated film of Fern Gully. Might be a little bit before your time. It came out in 1992. But what does an organism really need? Well, obviously things need food or nutrients to survive. They need water, shelter, or protection from predators. They also need air, so depending on if they're doing photosynthesis or cellular respiration at the time, they need either oxygen or carbon dioxide. Organisms also, if they're a plant, they need sunlight in order to do that photosynthesis to produce their own food or nutrients. And organisms need space or access to nesting sites. These are all some of the things that an organism needs in order to live. So this brings us into the idea of ecological tolerance, which is the range of conditions that an organism can endure before injury or death results. So kind of the range of where can this organism actually live. Now, some organisms have very narrow ranges of their ecological tolerance. For example, a rose or an orchid needs the perfect soil, needs the perfect amount of humidity. But then there's other flowers like dandelions, and they can just grow anywhere, and they just really don't care. As long as they have some soil, they're going to start growing. So ecological tolerance can refer to specific temperature, salinity, flow rate of water, the amount of sunlight, the amount of access to space or nesting sites, the amount of competition, all that stuff that's going on. And this range of tolerance can be measured or applied to individuals or an entire species as a whole. So that gives us this graph here to help us visualize what is ecological tolerance. So if you think of all of the places where an organism could live, if the organism is able to survive, grow, reproduce, live happily, have lots of offspring, that's this green zone. That is the optimum conditions for that particular species. Now maybe we're getting a little too hot or a little too cold, or maybe a little too salty or a little not salty enough. Maybe there's way too many big trees shading out a particular location. Maybe it's open to broad sunlight in another, and this particular species needs that happy medium. That would be the zone of physiological stress. So anything where the organism can survive, but it's not really able to reproduce at all. It's not able to really grow and be successful, but it's hanging on. It's still alive. That would be these yellow zones. Now, if you get beyond that into the zone of intolerance, that means the conditions are so far out from what that organism needs to survive that the species is just absent, they're not there. So this range of ecological tolerance, that would be kind of a bell curve. We have the conditions they really like in the middle, and as soon as you get anywhere outside of those good conditions, the size of that population or the abundance of that population is going to start to decrease. This can lead into the idea of fundamental versus realized niche. Now, a fundamental niche is the abiotic conditions that are required for a species to grow, survive, and reproduce. So we have the example of the barnacles over here on the right-hand side of the screen. You can see that the brown barnacle at the top, please don't make me say that name, I've never been able to pronounce it correctly. So the brown barnacle has a fundamental niche, so that means they could, in theory, survive, grow, and reproduce anywhere from high tide down to low tide. But that's not where they're actually found, because the realized niche, or where they're actually found, is the abiotic and the biotic, so and the living conditions where the species actually lives. So the realized niche takes into account any type of competition or biotic factors that are influencing the actual niche where this particular species is found. So if you look on the bottom image, you can see the blue barnacle is able to compete with the brown barnacle, and the blue barnacle is just a little bit better at surviving and reproducing than the brown barnacle is in that low tide area. So you only find that brown barnacle in the upper high tide range, and the blue barnacle is found in its entire fundamental niche on the lower part of the tide range. So in summary, ecological tolerance, that is the image in the bottom on the left. You have the center part, which are the conditions where an organism can survive, grow, reproduce, live happily ever after. And anytime conditions get a little bit further away from that middle, that's where you start to see the population declining. And the fundamental and realized niche is really talking about what happens when you have two different species that are competing for these limited resources. So in the other graph over here, you have two species, the red line and the orangish yellow line, and they both have overlapping fundamental niche, but the red species, so species 1, is a little bit better at competing than species 2. So the realized niche is only a fraction of that overall range of tolerance where that species could live. Now I know this gets a little tricky, making sure you don't mix up any of these terms, but that's okay. Send me your questions and comments and feedback, and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And I hope that as you watch this video, you were able to learn something.